alternative position.
Can you identify a Republican senator right now that you think shares much of your common sense beliefs in making this country better, that you think you have a good opportunity of reaching across that line to that individual and forming that coalition?
You know, I can't really identify a Republican right now. I wouldn't want to identify a single member of the Senate, but I can tell you very importantly that I agree with some of the Republican senators, for example, that the bailout was a bad idea. I oppose the bailout. My opponent supports it. I believe that we need an economic plan that in effect works from the grassroots up rather than the top down. The measures I propose to help small business, provide loans. As I go around the state listening to small business people in Connecticut, what they tell me is banks aren't loaning. They aren't making loans. They can't borrow. They can't expand. We need to provide sources of loans for small business. That's part of my Made in Connecticut plan, to provide direct SBA loans to small businesses and consortia of banks that can work together to provide those loans. Republican senators are supporting those measures, as well as Democratic senators. And Republican senators would support that kind of grassroots up approach as opposed to the bailout, which I think was too big, inadequately overseen, and poorly structured.
I had the same conversation with Joe Courtney, who also voted against TARP 3 times, and we took a position in support of TARP. In the argument and the discussion I had with Joe is that I grant you, sitting here today looking back to the bonuses and everything else that has transpired, certainly no one is pleased with the way it worked out. But at that moment in time, when this nation's financial industry was on the verge of collapse, and no one knew what was going to happen, didn't it make sense for this economy to somehow prevent that collapse from happening?
There was a role for the government to play, but that doesn't justify a program that fails to hold accountable Wall Street and the investment banks. In effect, TARP did everything Wall Street wanted, but failed to do enough for Main Street. If we had done more for Main Street, that is for small businesses, we would have lower unemployment rates today. If there had been more accountability, we would be in a better position today. So the fact that it was of excess size, inadequately supervised, so that there was inadequate accountability, poorly structured, were flaws in that program. You know, everyone believes, or a lot of people believe, that we should do something about healthcare. The question is what? I support the healthcare reform. My opponent says it should be repealed. I've seen firsthand the problems with abuses by healthcare insurers. I do thousands of cases where people have been denied medically necessary treatment, stem cell transplants, cancer medicine, that they absolutely need, but the healthcare company says they're going to deny because they view it as a pre-existing condition, or the doctor's out of network, or the treatment is experimental. This healthcare measure helps to eliminate those abuses right now. It also eliminates the caps on lifetime benefits. It enables people to keep their children on their policies till they turn 21. Helps to eliminate discrimination based on gender and other factors. A range of measures that I think address healthcare coverage abuses. And I see these cases because I go to bat for those people who come to my office. And we win 90% of the time. in those thousands of cases, which shows me the healthcare companies are wrong, the doctors and their patients are right. The doctors and patients ought to be the one deciding on what is really medically appropriate and necessary. And the healthcare measure accomplishes some of those results by curbing the abuses, and very strongly so. And there are other good things in the healthcare reform bill. But I think it needs improvement. The idea that we need to do something about a problem doesn't mean that we need to do necessarily what Washington did on the bailouts, or to take the healthcare reform measure as a final answer. I think we need to do more about healthcare reform in cutting costs of medical care. They're spiraling out of control, going up at 5 times the rate of inflation. And there are specific measures, for example, cutting waste and fraud. I know about cutting waste and fraud because as Attorney General, I have successfully pursued it in partnership with other states and the federal government. We've returned millions of dollars to Connecticut as a result of waste and fraud in government programs dealing with Medicare or Medicaid. And there is plenty of room to do more in cutting waste and fraud. The pharmaceutical drug sweetheart deal that provides for $200 billion in additional monies to the drug companies because we don't negotiate Medicare rates is another example. As you know, the VA does negotiate those rates. Medicare doesn't. A sweetheart deal that was approved by both Republicans and Democrats. So there are measures we can take, necessary and important measures that improve these government programs, even if we think their goals are a good idea. The stimulus program, another measure that I opposed, because it had inadequate requirements for how the money should be spent to create jobs. Roads, bridges, transmission lines that transmit electricity distributed throughout, for example, the state of Connecticut, and would lower the cost of electricity if they had been supported by the federal government earlier in our history. Those kinds of infrastructure measures, I think, are a good thing to support. They not only invest in our future and improve our infrastructure, but also they create jobs. They put paychecks in people's pockets. They provide work for contractors and subcontractors, small businesses that create jobs. So this discussion can approve the goals of government programs, going back to the bailout where we began, not to completely digress. The government may have had an appropriate role in doing something to stop the impending catastrophe. But the bailout was the wrong way to help Main Street because it, in effect, was a bailout for Wall Street.
Let me play devil's advocate with you. Your opponent wants to paint you as a good old boy, career politician, die-hard blue Democrat who's just going to be a rubber stamp down in Washington. Why would it be unfair for someone to look at 4 years ago, where you initially supported Joe Lieberman's re-election up to the point where he lost the primary, and then switched your allegiance to Ned Lamont, the nominee, and make an argument that you're just going to go along with party line? Where was that, how sincere was your support for Lieberman in the first place that overnight you're going to switch party lines? Can Dick Blumenthal's support be counted on today and tomorrow?
I supported the Democratic nominee, and I think most people would expect a member of the Democratic Party, a candidate, and I then was a candidate for re-election as Attorney General, as the Democratic nominee, to support the Democratic ticket. And I think what people should regard principally is the stands I've taken, the fights I have undertaken, the work that I've done to reach across the aisle in many of those fights. But most important, differences I have with my own party. I haven't hesitated to disagree with members of my own party where they took a different stand. I've been critical for example, of Wall Street reform, although I backed the bill because it failed to do enough on the credit rating agencies, which were a major culprit in the financial collapse. Credit rating agencies enabled the sale of many of the mortgage securities that then became worthless and in many respects triggered the meltdown of the markets in general, or the near meltdown. So I've differed with the administration on the bailout, the Democratic administration in that instance. I've differed with the administration on the giveaways to the pharmaceutical drug companies, the sweetheart deals with them. I've differed with the administration on the F-22, favoring its continuation. I won't hesitate to differ with a Democratic or a Republican administration where I believe the interests of Connecticut are best served by standing up and fighting and putting people first. And one thing people of Connecticut know about me is that I will put them first. I will not put profits ahead of people. And if you want to talk about my opponent, and she's the one who is calling me the career politician, people of Connecticut know about me that I've stood up, I've fought for people, sometimes when they had nowhere else to turn. Just as one example of her dealings with people, she cut 10% of her workforce and took home $46 million that same year.
Mm-hmm. And we'll be discussing that with her. But let me stay on this and again continue my devil's advocate with you about standing up to people in your own party. You will agree with me, I'm sure, that the Constitution of the state of Connecticut mandates the General Assembly to pass a balanced budget. And I think there's more than enough folks who will attest to the fact that the budget that was passed by this past general Democratic controlled General Assembly was anything but balanced. Was that a role for the Attorney General who takes an oath to serve and protect the Constitution? Should the Attorney General's office, irregardless of what party is holding that office, should the Attorney General's office have stepped in and said, whoa, wait a second, guys, you're not living up to the constitutional mandate of passing a balanced budget?
The budget is not within my purview, Ray.
But the Constitution is.
And the Constitution and the laws require certain actions. The governor indicated her conclusion that it met the law. And my view is that I have a responsibility to help both the governor and the General Assembly, advise them when they ask me for my opinions, and take stands based on what I believe the law to be.
But you've never been shy about stepping forward and saying, well, someone asking for your opinion and saying, whoa, this is not right. And
official
and
opinions, Ray, have to be requested.
I understand that.
And if you are asking for my opinion, first of all, I have to respect my constitutional role to enable the budget process to go forward. I may have personal views about whether certain policies or programs are a good idea or not, but I can tell you about the federal budget, that our deficit is too big, that we need to cut spending, priorities are required. I would vote to cut spending in certain areas. That's what people are interested in knowing for this election. I would not cut Social Security. I would not impose a means test. I would not raise the eligibility age. Those promises we have made to our seniors, and I believe I'm the only candidate in this race who has taken those stands unequivocally and who has said that is a proper subject for this election campaign.
Well, then let's talk
And
about
and I have also taken the position that we should not cut Medicare guaranteed benefits.
All right, then let's talk about the F-22. The military doesn't want that plane. And yet, because there is